As Sika, the capital of Prospero, burned, while the space wolves slaughtered all in sight, the battle between demigods would commence. Purple lightning split the sky, and the heavens darkened with the sudden fall of night. A deluge of black rain fell, soaking everything in an instant, saturating the air with the bitter taste of sodden ashes. Ahriman looked up to see a flaming giant descending from the highest reaches of the pyramid of Photep. The crux Anatsta rippled with a pellucid green fire, and kaleidoscopic bolts of lightning slammed into the ground, immolating dozens of cursed wolfen with every blasting strike. Cracks split the ground, and the water surrounding the pyramid seethed and boiled with anger. Black waves crashed upon the shores, and the glass shards from the pyramid were caught in a surging sentient wind that hurled them like spears to impale enemy warriors and skewer them to the ground. Ahriman felt an enormous buildup of energy and summoned all his strength to control his body, knowing the mutations within his flesh would seek to throw off the shackles of his form and unleash new and terrifying ones within him. Yet the painful surge of mutant growth never came. He looked up at the radiant being of fire and light that drew ever closer. Magnus the Red was a glorious sight, his golden armor and wild red hair ablaze with etheric energy. His bladed staff threw blinding arcs of lightning that destroyed armored vehicles in thunderous explosions. Magnus swept his eye across the horrified space wolves, and all those who met his gaze died in an instant, as they were driven to madness by the Stygian depths of the infinite chaos they saw there. Above Sika, madness raged as the power of the great ocean pierced the sky and became a transparent window into the realm beyond. Gibberish eyes the size of mountains and amorphous monsters, the likes of which only madmen could dream, leered down on the doomed world below. Hundreds died instantly at the sight of such blasphemous horrors. No sane man could witness such vileness without recoiling, and the invading army paused in its slaughter, shocked by the sight of such dreadful things, glaring hungrily at the world below. Even the wolfen cowered at the sight of these abominable creatures, feeling the overwhelming insignificance of their existence. Only Leman Russ and his wolf companions stood unfazed by this vision of Magnus, and Ahriman saw a gleam of anticipation in the Wolf King's eyes, as though he relished the idea of finally coming to conflict with his brother. Magnus set foot on the causeway, and the normal tempo of time slowed to a crawl, each raindrop falling as though it were in slow motion, these zigzagging traces of lightning moving with a now infinite slowness. The volcanic stone of the causeway rippled with transformative energies beneath Magnus's very feet, and Ahriman dropped to his knees before his Primarch, as centuries of ingrained obedience made the motion unconscious. The Primarch of the Thousand Suns was a divine, rapturous figure of light amidst the darkness. The gold of his armor had never been brighter, the red of his vast mane never more vivid. His flesh burned with the touch of immense power, greater than anything it had ever contained before. His eye locked into Ahriman, and the depths of despair he saw in that haunted, glowing orb froze the blood in his veins. In that moment, Ahriman felt the horror Magnus had felt as his sons mutated into monsters, and the anguish centuries later as he watched them butchered to serve a brother's lunatic ambition. He understood the noble idea that had stayed the Primarch's hand throughout the battle, recognizing it for what it was, not for what he had thought it be. He felt his father's forgiveness for doubting him, and he heard his voice in his head. "This doom was always meant for me, not you," said Magnus, and Ahriman knew that every warrior of the Thousand Suns was hearing the same thing. "You are my sons, and I have failed you." Ahriman wanted to weep at his Primarch's words, feeling the sorrow of a being who had beheld all of creation but fallen short in his reach to grasp it. When Magnus spoke again, he alone heard the Primarch's voice. "Azek, lead my sons within the pyramid." "No," he cried, tears of grief mingling with the rains falling within the endless night. "You must," insisted Magnus, his right arm pointing towards the bronze gates of the pyramid, which now swung open. White light shone enticingly from within. "Aman awaits you, and he bears a priceless gift you must bear away from this place." You must do this, or all we have done here will be for naught. What of you, my lord? What will you do? What I must, said Magnus, looking over the raging form of Leman Russ as he charged with a glacial lack of speed into the causeway. The Primarchs reached down and touched the jade scarab at the center of Ahriman's breastplate. The crystal stone shone with a pale light, and Ahriman felt the immense power resting within. This was cut from the reflecting caves, Magnus said. Every warrior in my legion bears one set within his armor. When the moment comes, and you will know it, concentrate all your energies into this crystal and those of your brothers. I do not understand, pleaded Ahriman. What must I do? What you have been destined to do ever since before you were born, said Magnus. Now go. I will stand with you, vowed Ahriman. No, said Magnus, with an air of infinite regret. You will not. Our fates are unraveling as we speak, even now. And what happens here has to happen. Do this last thing for me, Azek. Though it broke his heart, Ahriman nodded, and the world swelled around him as the flow of time restored its integrity from the distortion Magnus's arrival had created. The bellows of burning pyres and the immaterial thunder rolled across the face of the world once more, and the deafening fire of weapons roared ever louder than before. However, now the howl of the Wolf King bolted out about them. Ahriman and the Thousand Sons turned and ran towards the pyramid, and so there would be a fight between the Primarch of the Space Wolves, Leman Russ, and the Primarch of the Thousand Sons, Magnus the Red. And it would be exclusively between the two, as it had been a long time coming. Personal grudges and vendettas simmering to a boil under the puppeteering of Horus Heresy and the Changer of Ways, Tzeentch. Uncountable masses of people filled the pyramid, terrified civilians and exhausted Spire Guard. The Thousand Sons poured inside, their armor black and dripping from the nightmarish deluge drowning the world beyond. At a conservative estimate, Ahriman guessed that there were just over 1,000 warriors that had escaped the attack of the Vulfin. A tenth of the legion, he said. A horrifying scale of loss, and it was staggering to him. Hathor Mat and Sobek came alongside him as he struggled to come to terms with what had become of his beloved legion. Still numb from the sight of so few survivors, Ahriman sought out Ammon, who stood at the center of the vast chamber. Ammon, clad in his armor, but the plates themselves were clean and unblemished. His weapons were sheathed as he carried a reinforced chest, sealed with a padlock of cold iron. He said, "You would live," said Ammon. "Yes, years ago, as you lay dying, in the midst of the flesh change, he knew you would live to see this day." "Spare me your tales," stormed Ahriman. "The Primarch said you have something for me." "I do," confirmed Ammon, holding up a chest for Ahriman to open. "It's locked, to all others perhaps, but not to you." "We do not have time for this," hissed Ahriman, looking over his shoulder as the two gods of war clashed. With the sound of worlds colliding, blazing light filled the pyramid, and the howl of Leman Russ vied with the thunderous lightning of Magnus. "You must make time," snapped Ammon, "or this will be for nothing." Ahriman reached to open up and took hold of the lock, which snapped open with a metallic click at the touch of his hand. He opened the lid and drew a breath as he saw the book within, its cover red and cracked with age, as though it had been an archaeological find instead of a working grimoire. "The Book of Magnus," breathed Hathor Mat. "Why me?" demanded Ahriman. "Because you are its new bearer," said Ammon. "You are said to keep it safe and ensure the knowledge contained within its pages never falls into the wrong hands." Ahriman lifted the book from the iron chest, feeling the weight of power and expectation contained within its hollowed pages. The potency of incantations and formulae called to him, alluring and redolent with promises of great things he might achieve, with the secrets inscribed upon its pages. He wanted to refuse, to place the book back in its chest and secure the lock so that no one could ever gaze upon its pages and crave the power it could grant. He wanted Magnus to return and retrieve his grimoire, but understood with a sudden clarity that that was never going to happen. Magnus had no expectation of surviving his duel with Leman Russ. Ahriman took the book and ran back to the bronze gates of the pyramid, desperation lending his strides greater speed. Brilliant flashes of light and thunderous impacts came from the other side of the gate, as colossal forces beyond mortal comprehension were unleashed. Ahriman reached the mighty portal and saw the battle between the two brothers that was unparalleled in its savagery, power, and folly. Magnus and the Wolf King struggled with the fate of a world balanced on the outcome. Forking tresses of lightning shot upwards from the ground, isolating them from the hosts of wolves and custodes. Rust rained blow after blow on Magnus, shattering the horned breastplate, and in return, Magnus struck his brother with a searing blast of cold fire that cracked armor and set his braided hair alight. It seemed as though the combatants had swollen to enormous proportions, like the giants they were in the myths of legend. The Wolf King's frostblade struck Magnus, but his golden axe turned to blow aside, as they spun and twisted in an epic battle of death and madness, with the wrath of a blazing storm of sheet lightning and pounding thunder. This battle was one that was fought on every level, physical, mental, and spiritual, with each Primarch bending every ounce of their almost limitless power to the other's destruction. The waters around the pyramid broke upon the shores, black as oil, churning as though an unseen tempest had boiled beneath the surface. Space wolves and custodes plowed through the water, wading through the crashing spray to reach the pyramid in lieu of aiding Leman Russ in his battle. Magnus swept his hands to the side, and the warriors in the water cried out in agony as it transformed into a corrosive acid, burning through ceramite plates and rendering flesh and bone into jelly. A thickening rain fit to drown the world, and the ground underfoot transformed into a sinking quagmire from which writhing shapes like grasping hands would emerge. Wounded warriors were dragged down into the mud, struggling against the unseen attacks, but were unable to resist being pulled under to their doom. Prospero was breaking apart, the veil between worlds was cracking, and the maddening gibbers and screams of the great ocean's denizens drove men to their knees, in fright and terror alike. The assault on the senses was total, and Ahriman could barely keep his feet as hurricane-force winds battered the pyramid, tearing glass panels from its structure and breaking the silver and gold towers from its corners. Thunder banged in the midnight sky, and heaving earthquakes ripped ever-widening cracks in the ground, toppling the few structures of Zika that remained. At the epicenter of this destruction were Magnus the Red and Leman Russ, and Ahriman watched the two titans wrestle with the bitter enmity only reserved for those who had once called each other friend. Such a contest of arms was the most desperate thing Ahriman had ever seen. He wanted to rush forward to remind them of their former kinship, but to intervene in such a planet-shaking conflict would be self-termination. Ahriman had cautioned his warriors not to wield their powers for fear of the flesh change, but Magnus showed no such restraint, and battered Leman Russ with a fist wreathed in fire and lightning. Russ was a Primarch, and such powers as could shatter armies had little effect on him, save to drive him to higher fits of rage. Magnus drove his fist into Russ's chest, the icy breastplate cracking open with a sound like planets colliding, and shards of ceramite stabbed the Wolf King's heart. In return, Russ snapped Magnus' arm back, and Ahriman could hear it shatter like 1,000 pieces of glass. A blade of pure thought unsheathed itself from Magnus's other arm, as he drove it deeper and deeper still into Russ's chest through his shattered armor, and the blade would burst from the back of Russ, and the Wolf King howled, letting loose a deafening bellow of pain. A chorus of wolves that were not wolves added their own howls to that of their master. The two enormous lupine monsters that accompanied Russ leapt upon Magnus, fastening their jaws upon his legs, as Magnus slammed his fist into the back of the black wolf's head, driving it into the ground with a strangled yelp, its skull surely shattered. With a bellow of anger, Magnus tore the white wolf from his leg, and with a thought hurled it away, over his head and Russ's back. Ahriman suddenly felt a hand, then many, dragging him back, away from the howling winds and the driving rain that tore through the gates. He tried to shake them off, as if someone shouted his name. Hathor Mat and Ammon pulled him away from the entrance as the vast mechanisms slowly began to haul the enormous gates closed. "No," he shouted, as his words were snatched away by the screaming winds. "We can't, we must," shouted Hathor Mat, pointing towards the crashing waters separating the space wolves from the pyramid. Using the stalks of their bolters as paddles, the enemy had jury-rigged concave shards of roof debris as makeshift boats, and were surging over the waves the gateway. The water itself had returned to its natural state, as the froth patches of liquids, flesh, and bone began scumming back to the surface, as the only reminder of the men who had once died there. Hordes of Vulfin plunged into the water, entire packs pushing towards the pyramid, with hundreds more right behind them. Ahriman looked past the approaching monsters to see Magnus the Red and Leman Russ locked in battle high above the causeway. The furious horror of their struggle obscured by the ethereal bursts of fire and lightning. A flare of black light erupted, and Russ cried out in agony. His blade lashed out blindly and struck a fateful blow against his foe's most dreaded weapon, his eye. In an instant, the pyrokinetic cascade of light and fire was extinguished, and a stunning silence swept outwards. All motion ceased, and the titans battling on the causeway were no more. Each Primarch now returned to their customary stature. Ahriman cried out as Magnus reeled back from the Wolf King, his hand reaching his eye. His shattered arm crackled with regenerative energies. As broken and bloodied as Leman Russ was, he was a brawler enough to seize the opportunity, as he barreled into the grip of Magnus the Red and held him around the waist like a wrestler, roaring as he lifted his brother up above his body and high above his head. All eyes turned to Russ as he brought Magnus down across his knee. The sound of the Crimson King's back breaking tore through every warrior of the Thousand Sons' heart. Ahriman fell to his knees, dropping the book of Magnus in sympathetic pain, like a white-hot spear stabbed straight through him. No pain in the world was worse, for this blow could unmake a Primarch, and such wounds were like a death strike 100 times over to any mortal warrior. He knelt against the closing gateway as a Wolfin finally reached the shoreline, alongside warriors led by blood-fanged captains with burned hair and ice-bladed axes. The Wolf King triumphed as he said a loud howl and brought his frost blade down upon the head of his defeated foe. With the last of his strength, Magnus turned his head, and the remnants of his ravaged eye found Ahriman. This is my last gift to you. Leman Russ' blade swept down as its lethal edge struck, but just at that moment, Magnus whispered unnatural syllables, unknown to man since he first raised his guttural chants to the nameless gods in the sky. Magnus's body underwent an instantaneous dissolution, its entire structure unmade with a word, and Ahriman gasped as the vast depths of power surged into his body. It was too much for any mortal to contain, but it swept through him, and he knew what he had to do. He clasped upon the jade scarab set upon his breastplate, filling his mind with every curve, nuance, and imperfection, the intricacies of its golden mounting, and the exact dimensions of the black scarab worked into its substance. He knew everything about the gem and pictured the identical artifact in the chests of each and every warrior of the Thousand Sons, and even as he visualized them, the power in him spread to the entire legion as Magnus gave the last of his strength to save his sons. A terrific groaning shattered the stillness, like the spine of a world sundering and shearing out of tune. The sound of madness tore through the mundanity of substance as reality drew its dying breath, as a god unleashed its power. The surface of Prospero twisted and turned as Ahriman felt a dreadful lurch and the sickening feeling of vertigo. It felt like he was falling, as if the world itself had bottomed out, and he descended upon an endless shaft as the world vanished and was replaced by the complete and utter blackness at the end of the universe, when all living things had been dust for billions of years. As it appears, in those last desperate moments when death seemed inevitable, Magnus reached deep into the warp and enacted a desperate spell, and with it he tore open a portal and spirited away what remained of his legion, the survivors, the ruins of Sika, and the last of their sacred knowledge. They all vanished into the immaterium, to a world prepared for them by a being that had watched closely, Tzeentch, the changer of ways. And so their new refuge was hidden deep within the Eye of Terror, and would come to be known as the planet of the Sorcerers. And thus ended Prospero, not in battle, not in glory, but in betrayal of a kind most foul, not by decree, but by design. Now removed from the galactic stage, by not just the will of the Imperium, but perhaps by something darker, by the very manipulations of chaos and the god who sought to be patron therein. It seems that after the fall, the Legion was once again reduced to a fraction of its might, as roughly 1,000 battle-ready psychers and warriors remained with the living. But fate perhaps had different designs, as it reunited them with over 3,000 scattered brethren who had been stationed away prior to the razing of their home. By the time of the Siege of Terra, their strength had swelled to an estimated 9,000 Space Marines. Though they were now a legion in name more than structure, they had become manyfold more powerful than they had been previously. And so, during the Heresy's middling years, the Thousand Sons largely vanished from coordinated action. Fragmented cells of the Legion were confirmed operating independently from the wishes of their Primarch upon distant worlds such as Prism, Cabal, and Logan's world, along with Yaman, and appearing within other warbands. Notably, these groups exhibited divided loyalties. Some pledged their strength to Horus. Others, despite the wounds inflicted upon them by the Emperor's decree, remained loyal to the Imperium. These so-called loyalists often operated alongside similarly estranged forces, such as the Black Shields. Amongst these fragments were several notable factions: the 5th Fellowship under Sul Kuntep, who escaped Prospero and would later ally himself with the Imperial Fist; Sect, operating from the Forge World of Zau Akald, along with the warband of Corsion; and, most mysteriously, the Thousand Sons attached to the 209th Expeditionary Fleet, still loyal, were irrevocably altered. Meanwhile, the Legion's central body had turned inwards, focusing on the shattered soul of their Primarch, following Magnus the Red's near death during the razing of Prospero. It was also discovered that his essence had splintered into multiple shards, each one essentially a consciousness unto their own. Ahriman, alongside his cabal of sorcerers, dedicated their efforts to recovering and restoring these fragments. Their successes were near total, yet Magnus revealed that a final shard rested upon Terra. Just as the traitor host set its sights on humanity's throne world, their mission was now set. When the Siege of Terra commenced, Magnus and his 1,000 sons were amongst its very first invaders. Though their numbers remained relatively small, their role was distinct. Rather than wage open war, they acted as a vanguard of arcane warfare, summoning demonic allies and weaving sorcerers' support onto the greater offensive. It wasn't until the outer bulwark of the Imperial Palace was breached that they were called upon once more into direct action, as the 1,000 Sons unraveled the psychic wards protecting the Emperor's sanctum. Sorcerers channeled their devastating rituals, while legionaries clashed with the Imperial defenders, and yet their advance was broken by a counterassault led by Rogel Dorn. He himself was accompanied by the remaining librarians of the Blood Angels and the Imperial Fists, directed by the Emperor to blunt the sorcerers' tides. In a final desperate measure, Magnus would lead a strike team, ostensibly designed to reclaim his final shard. However, upon learning it was unreachable, he turned his mission. Magnus now sought to slay the Emperor outright, his plan foiled by the Salamander's Primarch Vulcan and his elite Drake swords, along with the Space Wolf's infamous Bovir Brojak. During this brutal confrontation, Magnus would surrender fully to the ruinous powers, as he vanished with his surviving followers into the depths of the Imperial dungeon, and he would eventually be met by Vulcan in a direct confrontation. And with their Primarch irreversibly corrupted, the 1,000 Sons cast their remaining loyalty behind Horus, joining the final climactic assault upon the Eternity Gate. In the Webway, Magnus enacted a ritual to drain the Emperor of his power and compromise his anti-demonic defenses. Here, Vulcan would once again intervene. In his dreams, his brother still looked like his brother. The landscape around them was a volcanic nightmare, and the realm of blackened skies and boiling earth. This was a very dragon's delight. The two brothers took counsel together. In their psychic silence, the two of them facing one another, in the arena of the unreal reality that his brother was the one to bring them here, each and every time. And if it wasn't for his brother's will, then it was the whim of the thing with their talons around his brother's heart. Vulcan no longer believed there was a difference when he saw his reflection in the pool of volcanic glass. He appeared the way he felt, wary to the point of ruination, a fact he could mask easily enough in the throne room. Yet he had no hope of hiding here. In this place, he appeared as a dragon on the edge of decrepitude. His scales no longer shimmered with an emerald luster. Instead, they faded to a flawed jade. His eyes, which had been searing red, were tight and dull with torment. Even the fire within him was down to an ember. A guttering flicker of warmth was all that was left. His brother, the sorcerer, descended slowly in a haze of pure light. The light warmed the dragon. It quickened his blood and reknit the throbbing internal breaches inside his body. It promised true healing if he would only stop resisting. "I hate seeing you like this," his brother said. Compassion shone in the sorcerer's eyes. "It needn't be this way. You are not my brother," the dragon grunted as he shifted his pained form. Even his bones ached. They sent pulses of cold through the meat of his muscles. "You still deny me?" the sorcerer said, his words rich with regret. "Do I not bring you here to Nocturne to ease your spirit?" The dragon managed to laugh, though it tasted of dust instead of fire. "This is not Nocturne," he said. "The stars hang where they should in the sky, yet they shine wrong in the black. The chemical processes of the rock are exact, yet the stone feels wrong to the touch. This is Nocturne through the eyes of someone who has seen my homeworld but never understood it. Someone that never loved it." The dragon, despite his throbbing joints, bared his fragile fangs in a tired smile. "Someone," he added, "or something." The sorcerer went down to one knee, the very image of unearthing reverence. His voice, trembling with emotion, scarcely rose above a whisper. "I am still me, brother. I speak only the truth." The dragon sighed with another ashy breath. "The truth, if it even matters in dreams, is that my brother died long ago. You are not Magnus. You are an impostor. You are an impossible god's idea of Magnus." The laughter echoed around them, the laughter of 1,000 mocking voices, delighted in a joke only one of the brothers could truly understand. The dragon clawed back from a chorus of mad mirth, while the sorcerer stood in silence, radiating compassion, radiating patience and understanding. "How can you not hear that laughter?" the dragon asked him. "You are mocked without end, by a god you pretend you do not pray to." The dragon gave a wary smile. "There is no laughter," said Magnus. "I hear nothing but your lies, Vulcan." The dragon smiled, a mouthful of cracked fangs. Enough of you. Enough of that thing animating you. Leave me be." "Let me in," countered the sorcerer. "This is only the beginning of your pain, brother. I have foreseen a greater agony in your future, agony that you cannot endure. But that pain will end with the mercy I bring. In place of devastation, I offer you enlightenment." The dragon dared not turn his back on his one-eyed brother. Even here, in dreams, he withdrew slowly, crawling over the rocks, his slitted gaze never leaving the sorcerer. "Let me in," said Magnus again. "How much strength does father have left? How much time remains in his performative defiance? An hour, a day, the skies above turn to ash. Clouds seethe with the anger of gods. The Khan is finished. Guilliman is still lost within the endless black. Angron bathes the Palatine ring in Imperial blood, and soon he will break Sanguinius. Fate sings of all this, Vulcan. I will reach the Webway portal, and I will break father's barrier. In a million futures I already have. Don't make me break you with it." The dragon gave a growl. "I am not sure I can be broken. You can die, Vulcan. You can be unmade. Everything of mortal origin can be unwoven with the lullaby of obliteration. Please don't make me be the one to end you." "Does your fate sing of that too?" Magnus smiled. "It grieves me to admit it, brother, but yes. To oppose me is to suffer annihilation. I wish it were not true, and it need not be so." The dragon managed to return the smile. He was too wary to be amused, but the sorcerer's insistences still kindled something like mirth deep within. "Of the many failures of our family," the dragon said with clenched teeth, "you stand exalted above the rest of us, warped so comfortably in your delusions. At least the others have the courage to face up to what they have become. Only you, Magnus, only you still cannot see who you really are." The dragon breathed the words, feeling like a fire had awoken inside, tasting the smoke running between the sore teeth. "There you are, brother." And their fight would go on. Magnus becoming more and more frustrated with Vulcan's inability to remain dead as, with each blast of eldritch power, Vulcan's very form would reknit itself, driving the Crimson King mad. And in his frustration, he was met with the reality that Vulcan had been empowered by their father, his regenerative abilities driven to new heights, those which it seemed Magnus's powers could not breach. Magnus continued blasting him until the point that the exertion of power had driven him down to one knee. His wings broken, his face in essence a cracked portrait of something he never was. No more Vulcan. He dribbled the words through the crushed jaw. No more. Vulcan circled around the drowned creature. His eyes narrowed, even for the merest moment. The demonic blood on his hammer steamed with the smell of a putrid funeral pyre. He didn't trust his brother's vulnerability, and he saw his caution reflected in him through Magnus's blood-webbed eye. I sense the energies that weave through you, said Vulcan, thinner, weaker, but still cursing and curling around us in the air. You are still seeking to attack Father. He expected Magnus to laugh. Instead, the sorcerer sighed. You deal with forces you do not comprehend. Killing me may let the Emperor breathe easier, but it will not free him from the Golden Throne. Vulcan's tone was now laced with ice and iron. Nevertheless, you will die. So finish it. Magnus hunched over, lowering his head for an executioner's blow. Save the Emperor. Let ignorance triumph over truth. Can you afford to wait any longer, little dragon? Magnus slowly raised his head as he gazed at Vulcan with mockery. Where is your urgency now? Where is all that righteousness? Knowing it was a trap, knowing he had little choice but to spring it, Vulcan raised his hammer. As it fell, the world turned. It wasn't blackness this time. He saw planets turning in the depths of night. Beautiful no matter what their color or surface conditions. Beautiful for their infinite complexity. Vulcan never looked at a planet and saw territories, cities, or resources. He saw a geological jewel, a sphere formed by astrophysical law and geomathematical processes binding it all together. He saw each world as unique, shaped just so. He believed that there was beauty in that. He drifted through space, descending to one world until it was a plateau beneath him. Hazy atmosphere. I thought we could speak. No, brother. Magnus showed his pale red palms, bare of any weapon. No, time is passing. In the labyrinth of the old ones, our hands are around each other's throats, with death yet decided. Here, we exist between heartbeats. Vulcan stared into his brother's lone eye. I believe you, he said. Magnus gave a wary smile. It's been a long time since I've heard those words. Prospero turned beneath them. Vulcan gazed at the wilds of the vast pagan continent, Pangean continent, and the distant silver pinprick of Zika, the world's only city. Speak then, and you will listen? Vulcan nodded. Very well. This is what you would have understood, brother. The Imperium is a lie we tell ourselves to make sense of a reality we fear to face. Under the Emperor, we have perpetuated a war that has sucked worlds dry of resources and cost billions upon billions of lives. We have spent life like meaningless currency, all because one man said we must. How many cultures have been annihilated, Vulcan? How many have we assimilated and robbed of their vitality, replacing innovation with conformity? How much knowledge have we destroyed because our father decided no one was allowed to learn it? Vulcan considered this as the planets rolled in a slow and sedated pace. This is how it got you, isn't it? Vulcan answered. Vulcan knew the answer even as he asked the question. The creature that gouged its way into your soul and laid eggs there. The thing that pulls your strings. Did it promise you knowledge? Did it paint the Emperor as the death of enlightenment? Magnus's expression answered for him. Long red hair fell to frame his face, and the sorcerer brushed it back from his cheeks. The imperial truth was a lie. The empire we built cannot be reformed, only overthrown. From violence it was born, and in violence it must end. Do you not see it? Once the board is swept clean, we can start again, with our eyes open and aware of the truths of the universe. You make it sound like a principled stand, said Vulcan, as if all you have done, all Horus has done, could ever be justified. Magnus turned to him sharply. What do I have to justify? Each time I was attacked, I defended myself. Each time they tried to silence me, I made sure to speak out. The Imperium lavished punishments upon my legion, draping its hypocrisy over us like a funeral shroud, and we fought back. Vulcan met Magnus's gaze, seeing the iron-clad surety there. This was futile. He knew it, yet the words came forth anyway. Look at the horrors your side has unleashed upon Terra. The massacres, the mutations. Magnus, you are taking part in the execution of your species. You cannot truly think you have done nothing wrong. Even you, brother, even you in your arrogance cannot believe this is justified. Necessity justifies all. This is necessary. Without this primeval force, without chaos, there would be stagnation, ignorance instead of illumination, existence instead of life. I did not write the laws of the universe, brother. I only take joy in the truth of this reality, but I won't hide from it. Vulcan would question, necessary to whom? An alien god exalted you and now demands you commit genocide? Magnus clenched his teeth, and the world once more turned, but not too far to reveal Nikaea, the city of light, the metropolis with white pyramids, and the city was aflame, beneath them burning in hellfire. Golden vessels of the Emperor's chosen, sleek black hunting ships of the Sisters of Silence, and the vessels themselves of the Space Wolves. They were many, and Prospero had so few. The raising of Prospero. There was murder in Magnus's eyes, murder and sorrow. Bear witness to our brother Russ bringing death upon my home world, and to all its people. Tell me, Vulcan, would you have reacted with temperance had it been the destruction of Nocturne instead? Vulcan didn't need to stare at the orbital bombardment, as he had read the reports. He'd seen pictures and footage and spoken to many of the custodians that took part in the assault. Nothing unfolding here was a revelation he wished to experience twice. Russ was lied to by Horus, deceived into attacking. I know, it changes nothing, but it should. You who value truth so highly would align yourself with the one who engineered the death of Prospero. And when the Space Wolves fleet arrived in your sky, what did you do, Magnus? Did you try to enlighten Russ? Did you use your power to prevent the assault? Or did the belief in your own persecution leave you assuming the worst of the Emperor's intentions? All witnesses say you languished in your tower, welcoming the destruction as your penance, until you decided to fight in the final hours, when it was too late to stop the massacre. Vulcan gestured to the destruction under the reigning atmosphere. Why would the Emperor order you and your entire legion dead? Did you not stop to wonder at the scale of this misunderstanding? I did, said Magnus. I thought he wished to punish me for ruining his great work. For a moment, Magnus paused, gazing at the host of Neverborn darkening the tunnels, as if seeing them for the first time. But how was I supposed to know? He refused to tell me of his great plan. If he had told me, Vulcan resisted the urge to spit at the sudden foul taste in his tongue. Again, you see the worst in all others, absolving yourself of blame. Why do you need to know of the great work? You were warned not to toy with the warp. We all were, but you couldn't resist. You believed you knew more, that you knew best, and that is why you alone lament being kept unappraised of Father's plans. Why is Sanguinius not enraged that he never knew of the Webway project? Why am I not enraged that I was kept ignorant of it? Why did you need to know? Magnus's eye gleamed with the reflection of a burning icon ahead. His former self, years before, racing to warn the Emperor of Horus's betrayal, reducing the Webway into an unsanctified scrap of rubble. With his very passing, Vulcan laughed with an unbearable tenor. How could Father have predicted you would defy his command? Not only did he use the will of the warp against his orders, you fueled your psychic warning with human sacrifice. How could he have known any of us capable of such barbarity? Magnus exhaled slowly, his hands clutching at the folds of his toga. He spoke a word of power, and the world turned. I had to warn him, said Magnus. No, Vulcan said. You believed that you had to warn him. You believed, as you always have, that you knew best, that you had to act, that you alone knew what had to be done. And never once did you think, through all of this destruction, that someone was deceiving you. The sorcerer glared at him. Why do you speak as if I were some lowly pawn in this game of regicide? The War Master, the Emperor, both know I am the most valuable piece upon the board. Vulcan was unmoved by the sorcerer's words, and by the cataclysm playing around before them. His tone was patient as it had ever been before the war. Vanity is what leads you, Magnus. You choke on arrogance, unable to see the architect of your own downfall. All of the others, all of Horus's broken monsters, at least they can see the bars of their cages. Even Horus, driven out of his mind to serve as a hive for the Pantheon, knows in his soul's core that he has lost control. You are the only one who believes he is still free. In the silence, Magnus would shake his head as the world turned with emotion. They remained in the throne room, but the great machines were overlaid in black and slain by esoteric forces, and the industry of the laboratory was replaced by a militaristic garrison presence. It was no longer a place of vision, it was a barracks, and it was closer to now. This was how the throne room had looked when Vulcan had last been there. Vulcan and Magnus were presented alongside their drifting past, as though in their recent incarnations. They watched themselves at the foot of the golden throne. Vulcan, implacable but for the regret lingering in his features. Magnus manifested as a beam of light, shimmering in and out of the layers of reality, barely perceivable to the human eye. Here, said Magnus, here is where I made my choice. You saw the Emperor make his final offer to me. You heard him promise me a new legion if I would only forsake Horus and come back to you all. A matter of mere weeks ago, brother. Will you tell me you have forgotten it? Vulcan sighed. He seemed suddenly weary. That is not how it transpired here, Magnus. The last unstained shard of your soul burst into the throne room and begged us to be saved. With a heavy heart, Father refused you. That is what I saw. That is what happened. Magnus's laughter was blunt and particularly derisive. And you say I'm the one who's been deceived. Vulcan was too tired to raise his bait. He merely met derision with solemnity. This thing runs through you. This chaotic force that you proclaim to be freedom. This is not but a disease to be caught on contact. It is a layer of emotion beneath reality. A poison that has achieved near sentience. You cannot pray it away. Once the rot sets in, once you're on the path, your fate is sealed. Wait, Vulcan, wait, how can this be? How do you know all of this? In the silence that reigned in the wake of their words, the throne room began to fade. Golden mist hazed its way around them, revealing patches of wraithbone architecture. Vulcan was relentless, his voice growing firmer. How could the Emperor ever trust you now? Why would he offer you a new legion, let alone a place at his side? You dreamed up your own redemption, just to give yourself something to rage against, because you need to feel as though you are the one choosing, not having choices made for you. The creature that has exalted you will never let you see the chains that bind you. The mist was everywhere, thickening as Magnus felt the change upon him, and beneath the sensation of power was a pull, a wrenching, a sensation of a trillion filaments woven into every last cell of his body, dragging at him. How, Magnus could barely ask, his voice shy of a breath. Where the mist touched him, his flesh was darkening, swelling. The shadow of raged wings loomed above him. How do you know this? Vulcan remained in place, saying nothing, doing nothing. Who are you? The world turned, and this time it wasn't moved by Magnus's will. The first strike of the hammer pounded Magnus into the wraithbone, a magma flow of ectoplasm running from his riven skull. The second cracked bones of one of his wings, splintering the spine of his shoulder blade. The third eradicated the demon's right hand, rendering it into dissolving paste. Breathless, standing over the paralyzed remnants of his mutated brother, Vulcan raised his hammer. In that same moment, Magnus somehow lifted his head as the sorcerer stared past Vulcan, over his executioner's soldier. Either he saw nothing, or he saw without the use of his eye, which had burst like fruit, turning into leaking pulp from his shattered socket. Wait, the demon winced, wheezing, as the word was ruined by a graveyard of teeth. Father, wait. Father is far from here, Vulcan almost said, wondering what visions were conjured in his brother's dying mind. But he saw fear in Magnus's face, imprinted with lines of regret. It was enough to make him hesitate. I do not have to do this, but he did. Not because it would free the Emperor of the Sorcerer's assault, not because of the thousands dying in front of the Eternity Gate, but because it was how the arch-enemy drilled inside a heart and soul. The creatures sank their tendrils into a person's hesitations, cracking them open to become doubts, creased along the edges of someone's virtues, heightening them and then souring them into flaws. They would do the same to Vulcan's mercy. Mercy was how the Pantheon would welcome him, and how he would begin to do their will. He would trust someone that breathed deceit. He would spare the life of a man that must die, and he would feel righteous as his 9 traitorous brothers felt righteous, deaf to the laughter of the gods as he moved in their etheric melodies. Like his brothers, he would believe that it was his own virtue guiding his hand. And so Vulcan swung one last time. With their master broken, the resolve of the Thousand Suns absolutely collapsed, and their lines fell apart. In the aftermath of Horus's death, the Thousand Suns fled Terra with the remnants of the traitor legions, utilizing their masteries of sorcery in order to open a conduit into the warp and spirit them away, hiding amongst those within the planet of the Sorcerers, marking their end in the role of the Heresy and the beginning of a far darker legacy. In the aftermath of the destruction of Prospero, the Thousand Suns' vendetta against the Space Wolves began to become one of their most bitter and ongoing conflicts, driven by their hatred for those who had brought them to their fall. the Thousand Sons launched numerous campaigns of retribution against the Space Wolves as they sought to undermine and destroy their ancient enemies, even as they too became pawns in the hands of the craven dark gods. One such attempt would involve the creation of a Chaos Temple atop a mountain spire upon the Space Wolves' homeworld of Fenris. This temple was dedicated to Tzeentch, and it would be known as the Demon Spire. Its creation was masterminded by Magnus, a high-ranking Chaos Space Marine in direct service to Magnus, and it was intended to serve as a base of operations for the Thousand Sons and their continuous conflicts against the Space Wolves. The Thousand Sons' efforts to destroy the Space Wolves did not end there, as upon the world of Graham, they would attempt to steal the Spear of Rust, a sacred artifact of the Space Wolves, in order to perform dark sorcerers rituals. Their goal was to transform the entire planet into a new demon world, bound completely to the will of chaos. However, their plan failed, though the spear was lost in the ensuing battle. The Imperial Guard were able to retake Graham and expunge the forces of chaos from the planet. In a pivotal moment, Ragnar Blackmane, the legendary hero of the Space Wolves, defeated Maddox, and in a desperate act, he cast the Spear of Rust into the partly manifested form of Magnus, banishing him back into the warp once again. The spear, however, would be permanently lost to the depths of the Immaterium, but the threat of chaos would be temporarily repelled. The war between the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves would continue for millennia to come, driven by an undying hatred forged in the fires of betrayal and bloodshed. Their conflict would become one of the central threads in the stories of not only the Horus Heresy, but in the history of the Imperium as a whole, a testament to a tragic fall of a once proud legion, and the unyielding vengeance of a fractured brotherhood.